Out of his great love, he picked me up, set my feet on a steady rock. Out of his great love, I learned the meaning of salvation. Out of his great love, I had gone astray, I had lost my way when I called upon his name. Then he rescued me, now the song I sing. Oh, what a loving God is he. Out of his great love, he picked me up, set my feet on a steady rock. Out of his great love, I learned the meaning of salvation. Out of his great love, now I shout his praise through all my days, for his endless mercy and grace. There's no other one who is greater love. With joy I will ever say, out of his great love, he picked me up, set my feet on a steady rock. Out of his great love, I learned the meaning of salvation. Out of his great love, salvation. Out of his great love.
Good. Okay. So the reading today is from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 2 through 7 and 15 through 16. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. So when Phil asked Brandon and I to speak, Brandon jumped on the opportunity, and I chose the last possible date. Public speaking is not my comfort zone, so I basically just chose a verse early on in the month and then have mulled it over and reflected on it this whole last month. I chose a verse based on what I knew I had upcoming and what I felt like I should learn more about, and a topic that maybe I needed practice on. I wanted a verse where I could read it over and over, and it would continue to just reinforce what I needed to practice. So this really isn't any sort of speech on what I'm good at giving advice about. It's just sort of some stuff that I knew I needed to work on. So the first part of the reading was what really struck me initially as very relatable for an upcoming big family vacation. As the month progressed, other parts of it became relatable in other ways as well, to include things in my life like my mom, our new puppy, and even the church day school director search. So the first part of the reading says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So that was the part that I was looking at for that upcoming family vacation. Humble, gentle, patient, bearing with one another in love. Bonds of peace. However, it does say completely at the beginning of this. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. And that was a really strong word, I felt like. I felt like the end part where it said just make every effort was a little bit more realistic. So I kind of went with that a little more. Family vacations always require patience. I recall a flight when it was actually just me and Andrew going up to visit my sister, and he was about 18 months old. And I thought I was being the very safe, dutiful parent to make him ride in the airplane in the ginormous convertible car seat. because then he would be in his 5-point harness and what he was used to being in. Well, what I found was that car seat, they insisted it go through the x-ray machine, and it got stuck. And they debated for about 20 minutes while that line was just building up and building up behind us, how they would take apart this x-ray machine to get my car seat out. And I was a little stressed, me and my toddler there hanging out. Finally, they decided that was a poor choice, and the TSA agent actually crawled through the machine and pushed it out the other side. There was a lot of patience that I tried to summon in that moment. And then it also required patience for all the people in line behind me, and some tolerance, I would say, for every person on the plane when then I carried this huge thing through the aisle of the airplane and kind of hit every single person on the way down the aisle with it. Needless to say, we haven't done that again. He just, after that, sat in the seat, didn't get the car seat. Our family has also learned that it is usually the best idea to be humble and gentle when working with gate agents who are trying to find your family a seat on the way home when flights have been changed. It's also good to be humble after filling up a diesel engine with gasoline, or after booking a rental car for a PM slot instead of an AM slot. And it's good to be gentle with others when those mistakes are made. As a family of 7, we constantly try to bear with each other in love, sometimes more successfully bearing than others. But this trip that we just made, this family vacation, wasn't just about patience, humility, gentleness that I knew I would need. This was a different vacation. So our recent trip to Idaho was with my mom's family, and we were headed up that way to scatter ashes of loved ones. And I knew that we would be gathering with a large group of people that we hadn't seen in a while, and I might have exceeded my 3 days of tolerance with some of my relatives, and therefore would need some extra practice with patience, humility, and gentleness. So I reminded myself, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So our family of 7 joined with my sister's family of 4, and we went to a beautiful house near a place called Smiley Creek, or Sawtooth City. It was in the middle of the Sawtooth Wilderness, near the Salmon River, also near the River of No Return and the Frank Church Wilderness. We were really in the middle of nowhere, and it was beautiful. It's truly God's country there. You look at the mountains and the rivers, and you just feel blessed. We all knew that Dr. Knott would have felt right at home fly fishing with Andrew and Abigail. This area of Idaho is where my mom's side of the family settled. They crossed the Oregon Trail to get there, and it's really a place that deserves awe. But it also felt like home. Years ago, in the same spot, we scattered the ashes of my granny and then my mom. And so it's this little section of river that we go to each time near a town called Stanley. This time, we were honoring my granddad, my aunt, my uncle, and my dad. We'd sort of saved up over COVID. So knowing that it had been a few years since we'd seen each other, and knowing that sometimes differences can bring us apart or together, I wondered how the gathering would feel for us. I wondered if the bonds of family remained strong, or if distance and time had weakened them. I wasn't sure how much effort I would need to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. This family, however, my mom's side of the family, has bonds that cross many differences. We started out with my granny and my granddad as Catholic and Presbyterian, and have added on a variety of other religions to include Baptist, Episcopalian, and there's a few agnostics in the bunch as well. We have Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians. We have educational levels ranging from not finishing high school to quite a few doctoral degrees. We have proud Yankees and boastful Southerners. We have maskers and non-maskers. We have those who had COVID or are afraid to get COVID. And we even have a lively discussion about beans in your chili, no beans in your chili, or can you even call it chili if there's no meat in it? In many instances, this combination of people could get a little dicey. However, I found that rather than needing to lean on this verse to find patience, humility, and peace, I realized that my family was displaying all of these traits through their love for each other, just as they always did. This side of my family is likely the most accepting family I've ever seen. They welcome people from all parts of the world and stages of life. They bring them into their homes, and they forgive a multitude of sins. It was also a family table where politics and religion could be discussed. Differences of opinion were welcome, and friendly disagreements were expected. My grandparents provided the example of loving acceptance, even though these differences require all of us to be humble, gentle, and patient, and bear with each other in love. I think what my grandparents modeled for us was that if we have love for each other, then those other traits fall in line. It's a lesson that was brought to us by God and His love for us. God gives us grace as we deal with these differences. Sometimes we don't do it well, and then He gives us forgiveness a second and third time, or sometimes many more times. One of my cousins came to spread his dad's ashes. I hadn't seen him in many years, and I came to learn that over the past 15 years, he had had a very hard time coping with challenges, addictions, homelessness, and everything that comes with that. It made me sad that we had lost touch over the years, but it also made me really thankful that he made this trip and that we were able to reconnect. I'm glad that I have a family that opens their arms wide to welcome home everyone. I just wish he had maybe been there all along. As we stood creekside to spread ashes, it was easy to feel the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And I knew my cousin felt it too. The unity of being part of our family and part of God's family. This brings us to sort of the last part of the reading. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. Of course, as a physician, I relate to the concept of the whole body, joined together, supporting and growing together with each organ system doing its important work. I feel like this portion speaks to the teamwork that happens within families or at our workplaces or our community. And of course, here, Paul is referring to the church. Without any one part, it's more challenging for the rest of the body. So back to our vacation. We went on a whitewater rafting trip down the Salmon River, and we had a guide who sat in the back of the boat. Her name happened to be Grace. Very convenient. If you've ever been on a whitewater rafting trip, the guide sits in the back and then provides instructions to all the guests, the tourists that sit in the rest of the boat. In order to steer the boat, she needs power, and so then she tells all of the tourists when to paddle to provide that power so she can turn the boat as it needs to go. Her instructions were that Andrew was our rate setter because he was seated on the front left, and then the rest of us had to follow his lead. Naturally, Sarah disagreed. She felt like Emily, who was seated in the front right, should be the rate setter because she felt like Emily would pay better attention. I sat behind Emily, and Sarah was sitting behind Andrew. And so Emily and I really had to sync up because we were on the same side together. And overall, our raft did excellent. But there were a couple of times where either myself or Emily maybe didn't follow Andrew's rate quite as well as we should have. And then our paddles would hit each other instead of pulling water in the direction that they were supposed to go. It was easy to see that we were not very effective in those moments in giving Grace the power that she needed to steer the boat. The whole body of the raft had to join together as we each did our part of the work to support the head of the boat, who was Grace in this moment. Luckily, though, Grace made us all look good. She was forgiving and got us all down the river safely despite our paddling and teamwork errors. I felt like this moment was very applicable to this reading and really gave us just a great example of how you really all have to work together. But even if you don't, Grace is there to save you. Our days were spent on various adventures, hiking, rafting, fishing, and the evenings were spent sharing meals and stories. As I listened to my family reflect on those who we lost, stories of Mom were brought back to the surface. My mom was full of so many of the traits mentioned in these verses, and she often reminded us, which I remind the kids, that many hands make light work. We are all supporting ligaments, growing together and building each other up in love. It takes all of us to lend a hand and make the church, the community, the office, or the family work. Some of you may remember her and some may not, but my mom is the reason why we are at this church. Years ago, during medical school and residency, we sometimes came to church. When Andrew was small, we also sometimes came to church, but it was so hard to fit it in our schedule, and it was simply not a priority on our treasured day off. Then, when I was pregnant with Sarah, we found out that my mom had terminal brain cancer, and we moved my parents to San Antonio. Mom had a few requests. Some were more logical than others. Like, she wanted to keep teaching, but she volunteered that since she couldn't drive, she would just ride the short bus to school. Or she really wanted a Whataburger chocolate milkshake all the time, usually at midnight. Also, she wanted to go to church every Sunday. And it was no small feat to get a toddler, a new baby, and my mom to church. The toddler and the baby were much easier than my mom. For my mom, it took a team of 2 to 3 people to get her dressed, transferred to the wheelchair, into the car, out of the car, into the wheelchair, and into church. But we did it because it was so important to her and because she was so important to us. And it was because of her that we came back and we were sitting in these pews and I came back to church. It was because my mom and all of us supporting her that we grew in love and came back to Christ. Through my mom's example of gentleness, patience, and humility, along with love and grace, we came back here. We tried to do our best to take care of her and it brought her peace to see that the family was finally united through the Spirit in caring for her. Although I specifically looked at a verse to make it relatable to what I needed to practice for our family vacation, I found that it related to other parts of my life as well. The original intention of the bottom part of this reading, the last part, was describing how the church should be built. So it says, from the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, should grow and build itself up in love as each part does its work. Some of you may know, but over the last month, we have been searching for a new day school director because our wise leader, Sharon, needed to move on to spend more time with her mother. We are also in constant search of day school teachers. So Andrea Sitterly, Sarah Mayo, and I found ourselves in constant prayer and constant meetings, and I ruminated on this verse. For the children at the day school, our goal is for them to grow and be built in love. We want them to grow to be the body of Christ. And to accomplish this, we have to provide support. The church must support the day school, and in turn, the day school also supports the church. It's a balance, and through this balance, we offer a healthy, safe Christian environment for our kids to grow in Christ. I saw that day school does a great job of exemplifying these ligaments working together, taking turns and supporting. All of the applicants that we interviewed were so pleased that if they came to work here, that they would have such a supportive team. The prayers were answered, and we had great candidates, and our new director will be Mrs. Allison Lanik. And I know she's going to do a great job and will provide that leadership so that all the ligaments within the day school will function together, and we'll have a new generation of day school kids that will grow together in love. Also in Ephesians, Paul was trying to give guidance about how the actual church would function. And I think this section really describes our church well. As my mom said, many hands make light work. And I saw, as I reflected on this verse, all the ways that the many hands in this congregation really contribute to making light work. There's folks that record sermons, that give sermons, that do the liturgy, that volunteer to be on the session, work on the property committee, deal with the insurance companies, help out with groundskeeping, and all these little tasks help the church grow together, and hopefully this will help our church continue to grow as well. So finally, on a very lighthearted note, I'm going to discuss how this reading relates to our new puppy. So we're going to go back to the beginning of the verse. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. We have a new puppy, and her name is Maple. Maple is part Pyrenees, part Kangal, and part Anatolian. Basically, she is destined to be a huge sheepdog. And she is truly the most adorable and the softest puppy you've ever seen. I'll actually try to get Bob to put a picture on her with the email with the sermons so that y'all can see what I'm talking about. She sits tall and she guards when she sees something or someone new, but as anyone approaches, she starts a tail wag that just gets more enthusiastic the closer they get. Everyone immediately says, "Oh, I love her," as soon as they see her. She is a fantastic example that when love comes first, everything else just seems to follow. That feeling of love helps me bear with her when she takes my shoes and carries them around the house. That feeling of love helps Brandon be patient with her when she makes a mess for the millionth time and destroys his plants. That feeling of love helps Sarah to be gentle with Maple when Maple takes her sharp little puppy teeth and crunches down on Sarah's calf muscle. And that feeling of love taught Andrew humility when he learned that a 10-pound little thing can invoke fear when you're laying down on the ground and when she is bounding towards you, ready to pounce like a lion on a gazelle in a National Geographic documentary. In Maple's moments of quiet, sleeping peacefulness or excited tail wagging, we see the bonds of unity restored and our love for her is renewed and deepened. In Ephesians, Paul is trained to give lessons on how we should act toward each other, and later, how to grow together to build a church. If we only treated other humans, strangers, friends, neighbors, or even family members, how we treat Maple when she messes up. If a neighbor dug up our flower bed, I don't think our first reaction is patience. If a stranger takes our shoes, I doubt we would bear with it. And certainly, if someone was as violent towards me as Maple is, I wouldn't approach them with humility and gentleness. If love comes first, though, that feeling of, oh, I love her as soon as you see her, it is much easier to be like Christ and approach others with patience, humility, and then eventually grace.
Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high.
Gospel of our Lord continues from St. Luke's, chapter 13, chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. It is the parable of the rich man, specifically aimed today for the suburbs of San Antonio. One of the multitude said to him, "Teacher, bid my brother divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, what made me a judge or divider over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of all covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The hand of a rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I'll pull down my barn and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." Love that. But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Listen for the word of God. It's beginning to look as if we have survived the great pandemic of 2019 to 22, which continues to bug us, but finally is in retreat. Mary and I came down with COVID this week. Smiles on your face. I was positive on Tuesday, asymptomatic by Thursday, and negative on Saturday, much to the relief of Phil, who told us 3 weeks ago that he always carries a spare sermon in his pocket. But does he carry two? He just showed it to me. Okay. We have all had losses. My wife Mary lost her beloved Aunt Benny, and a number of our friends succumbed. Nonetheless, as pandemics go, death was relatively mild, believe it or not. Nearly 25 million people died worldwide, but that number represents only 2 to 0.3% of the world's population. The Black Death, just saying those words, the Black Death of 1348 to 50 wiped out over 100 million people in a world with a much smaller population, and it represented over half of Europe's population. The Spanish flu of 1918, experienced by my parents' generation, had comparable fatalities to COVID-19, but killed up to 5% of the world's population. Now, I'm not saying that we're getting off easily with this, but let's now get really down and macabre. An even worse scenario for humanity is pandemic in the face of all-out war. That is what happened in continental Europe during the 30 Years' War of 1618 to 1648, involving countries from the Netherlands in the east to Poland on the west, from Sweden to the north to Italy in the south. In other words, the entire continent. Not just for 1 or 2, 3 years, but for more than a generation. The armies poured back and forth, up and down, over Europe. They brought bubonic plague, typhus, dysentery to the civilian population repeatedly. Estimates of fatalities attributed directly to the war are about 2 million military and 50 million civilians in Europe alone. Populations in European cities did not recover fully until 1750. Imagine a recession lasting a century. The 30-year war was the defining event for generations of ancestors of people who came from Europe. Africa, the Americas, Asia, all had their pandemics as well. But I'm focusing, for a reason, on this terrible pandemic of the 17th century. How do people respond to such a calamity? In the 1600s, it was common to seek the mercy of God through the performance of a community Passion play, portraying the last days of Jesus. After their population was decimated by the plague in 1631 to 33, right in the middle of this terrible war, the citizens of the small village of Oberammergau in Bavaria, located in southern Germany, not far from Italy and Austria. These people made a vow to present a passion play, a supplication for mercy. They performed it for the first time in 1634. And legend is that there were no further cases of the plague in the village. Of course, it might have run its course, or it might have been a miracle. History rolled on. The citizens of the village continued to put on the play decadally in years ending in 0. It has been delayed 5 times due to war and pestilence, and has been canceled twice. In 1770, the forces of the Enlightenment knew better and caused a short-lived closure, and World War II intervened as well. The Oberammergau Passion Play entered my own consciousness in 1950 from an article in My Weekly Reader. How many people have a resonance with My Weekly Reader? Okay, you're all old as dirt. Oh, sorry. It announced that the play would resume after 20 years and the cancellation of World War II. It lodged in my 10-year-old mind that it must be a significant part of European culture. Decades slipped by, 6 more performances, and somehow I never managed to get to Oberammergau. When 2020 approached, along with my 80th birthday, I had to face the reality that it probably was my last opportunity. In 2019, I asked my older sister if she wanted to join us, and she jumped at the chance. Then COVID caused a 2-year delay. So finally, this month, Mary and I and my sister experienced the play, which truly is the oldest, continuously running, dramatic performance on Earth. When the play began in 1634, it is one of about 400 passion plays in Bavaria alone. There was lots of supplication for mercy all over the continent. But by 1770, all had gone by the wayside. Only Oberammergau received permission from the government, that is to say the monarch of the Holy Roman Empire, to resume the performance in 1780. And they have continued with great fervor up to the present. The village has only 5,000 inhabitants. It's a small town. Imagine, many of you know, have lived in, have a contact with a town of 5,000. Their eligibility restrictions are strenuous. Only people born in Oberammergau or who have lived there for 20 years can participate. Originally, only unmarried women were allowed in the cast. And women were known to postpone marriage for years in hopes of receiving the parts of Mary and Magdalene. That did not change till 1990. The rules apply at all levels. Actors, members of the chorus and the orchestra, set and costume designers, writers, and even composers of the music all must come from a little town. 1 year before the initial performance in a given year, the men must cease shaving and cutting their hair. Roman characters accepted. Bavaria is a Roman Catholic region of Germany, but today there is no religious prohibition on participation. Just you're a Muslim. A man descended from Turkey's immigrants plays a principal role, in addition serves as assistant director. His full-time job is in Munich as a director, and he was indeed a fabulous Nicodemus. The structure and the content of the play have changed over the years. Today, it comprises 16 acts. Between acts, a 65-person chorus files onto stage to present a musical interlude, while in the background, a living tableau, carefully staged with background and human beings incorporated into a scene from the Old Testament that has a connection to the action from the New Testament. Thus, when Judas and Jesus argue about the future of their movement, a tableau follows with Cain and Abel. Each act combines several New Testament stories woven together. The first act showing Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on a donkey on Palm Sunday with great praise and happiness. The production does involve animals: horses, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and the donkey. Pontius Pilate usually rode in on a horse. When the animals had an accident, period-dressed technicians rushed out with equipment and cleaned everything up promptly. This year there are 109 performances, still going, from May to September, each attended by a full house. Every seat was filled, of 4,500 people. Multiply it out, that means it reaches 500,000 people directly. The performances may sound like an amateurish little theater, but they've had a few centuries of practice. It is neither mundane nor amateurish. The cast and the other participants comprise nearly 2,000 people out of 5,000 inhabitants, or nearly 40% of the population. There are crowd scenes with children, women with babies, milling about, children running through, tripping over things. When Jesus drove the money changers from the temple, he also drove out the sellers of, quote, cattle, sheep, and doves, according to John 2:13. On stage, Jesus sent real cattle and sheep packing, and a flight of doves took off from the stage and disappeared into the sky. I wondered if they were homing doves that would come back, or did they use up 6 doves at every performance? They did use up one large jar, which Jesus broke in anger. And the good people of Oberammergau offers pieces of the jar every day for sale afterwards if you want to take home a piece for yourself. One individual might first be one of these milling children, and then 10 years later, the disciple John, the beloved. 10 more years, he might be Jesus, the most desirable part. Then Peter, then possibly Caiaphas, or a member of the choir. A lifetime commitment for the members of this village. And they all have day jobs. All performances proceed, I felt, as if I was listening to the Chicago Symphony under the baton of Schulte, with vocal soloists from the Metropolitan Opera singing Beethoven's music. It was that good. In fact, the music was composed largely by Rochus Dedler. Nobody's heard of him. He was born in Oberammergau, of course, in 1779, son of an innkeeper. Died in 1822, very much Beethoven's contemporary. The current musical director, Marcus Zwink, introduced alternative music and text for some of the new tableaus. I noted that the roster of the chorus and staff contained 8 people named Zwink. In 1890, there were 3 Zwinks, and the name Zwink is found back as early as 1446. There is continuity here. Each of the 20 main parts is played by 2 actors who alternate. During this year beforehand, they have a trek to Israel to immerse themselves in the Israeli culture and to get used to what they will be doing in their roles. The chorus has 4 soloists: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. In the prelude, the chorus filled the stage, big stage, 65 people from stage left, stage right, and an unimpressive looking older man strode to the front with a grizzled full beard, long gray hair. As soon as he began singing, I was transfixed. Many bass singers have poor volume and the ability to project. This man had it all, filling the auditorium with his sonorous syllables. I teared up as I listened to him and almost missed the first tableau about the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise. If Mary hadn't elbowed me, my mouth must have been gaping open. I could not even find out the soloist's name, because each of the 4 soloist categories is filled by 4 different people on consecutive nights. Their talent level is deep. In another tableau interlude, there's an intricate duet between the alto soloist and the invisible clarinet in the pit somewhere, which cheered me up a second time. One tenor, not a soloist, just random tenor, in the chorus, always singing in the front row, stared constantly right at the audience. I thought he was looking right at me the entire time. He had such piercing eyes. Eternally, for all 5 hours of the production, that I felt I was in the presence of the ancient mariner, who, as you all know, said, "With thy long gray beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stoppest thou me?" The play began at 2:30 in the afternoon and continued for 3 hours, followed by a 3-hour dinner on your own, for which the restaurateurs of the village were very prepared. We reconvened at 8 and finished at about 10. The intention is to have the events of the crucifixion occurring as dark falls. Very effective. Carried out in full detail on the stage, including the raising of 3 enormous crosses with their burdens ensconced. The performance was in German, but we were provided with a full translation in English, which we could read as long as it was light. Troubles after it got dark. The original text was by Joseph Deisenberger, who incorporated many anti-Semitic passages, which became a problem in post-war Europe. In the last half of the 20th century, writers consulted with Jewish authorities all over the world and altered the text to remove every shred of anti-Semitism. The message of Jesus emphasizes the love of God for every person. These are the words of Jesus in the play, translated from German, but clearly paraphrasing the words of the New Testament. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who insult and persecute you. Caiaphas. I just love that name. You spit it out just like a Pharisee should get. Caiaphas, take care of your sheep. Find the lost. Bring back those who have strayed. Be merciful as our Father is merciful. If a Roman forces you to go 1 mile with him, go 2 with him. Love your neighbor as yourself. The critical question of the pandemic, or any other form of misadventure, is put in the mouth of Thomas in the play. Rabbi, why does God allow this to happen? Referring to the occupation of Israel by Rome, but clearly concerned with the 30 Years' War in the mind of the original audience. It is John the Divine who responds, "What are you talking about? God does not wish for these sacrileges. We make him responsible for all we do not understand." Peter, addressing Judas later, who desires the violent overthrow of Roman rule, recapitulates the same message. Detach the name of God from war, for it is not God who wages war, but people. No war is sacred. Only life is sacred. This is the closest the text gets to answering the eternal question, why terrible events such as the 30 Years' War occur in a world created by a good God. The message we are given is, first, God does not impose these events on the people, seemingly as punishment for their sins. Second, we try to make him responsible for the events we do not understand. Third, no war is sacred, only life is sacred. We struggle to understand terrible events that oppress us, but we should not blame God. Our best efforts should be directed to improving life for our neighbors, to what talents God gave us, whether they be diplomacy, science, entertainment, or cleaning up other people's messes, while loving the people who made them. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, thank you for listening.